The latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report was published last week, and the media's reaction was nothing short of hysterical. Almost all outlets are uncritically reporting the hyperbolic rantings of the Secretary-General, who claims, and I quote, "Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast." Countries are being urged to bring forward their net zero targets to stop the climate time bomb. That's another direct quote. Joining me now is energy expert and author of Fossil Future, Alex Epstein. Alex, these reports are vital for the green industry and the eco-obsessed progressive, but it's doing a lot of damage to people who aren't able to keep up with rising energy costs.
I mean, Guterres and these other people are really living in an alternate universe in which the world's biggest problem is fractions of degrees of warming, even though far more people die of cold than of heat. And there is no energy crisis that they obviously caused by suppressing the supply of fossil fuels. So what we've had is a world that's gotten better and better and better for 2 centuries. People have become more empowered, had more abundance, more safety, thanks to having cheap energy overwhelmingly from fossil fuels. And that only stopped when we started restricting fossil fuels, and life has gotten worse in the past couple of years, that plus taking away way too much freedom with COVID. And yet their whole solution is let's take away more freedom and let's ban fossil fuels again because of climate. And yet they don't mention the very true fact that climate-related disaster deaths are at all-time lows. So they're just totally, I mean, diluted is too charitable.
Well, and were you at all shocked at this stage that despite the hyperbole employed, the language and the doomsday language that was pushed there, that the media just reported it uncritically? There was very little skepticism, very little questioning of what was being said, and not that much analysis of the science behind it.
Well, I wasn't surprised. If I'm surprised at anything, it's how low a level what's called the IPCC has stooped to. So IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this is a sort of scientific organization that in many ways does valid synthesis of research, but they also do a very invalid communication of research and communication of policy implications to the public. And I've been critical of them for years for this. I talk about this a lot in Fossil Future, but they've really stooped to a new low. If you look at their so-called synthesis report, it doesn't synthesize science and economics at all. It just says a bunch of insane things like humanity is threatened, high confidence. There's not high confidence anywhere in the science that humanity is threatened. There's high confidence that life will continue to get better as long as we can keep using cheap, reliable energy to deal with every aspect of life, including the naturally dangerous climate. So the IPCC should be ashamed and it should be disbanded unless it seriously reforms. And the fact that more scientists haven't stood up against this, only a handful have, but this really shows a huge degree of cowardice or ignorance in much of the scientific community that they allow this trash to be promoted as science and a synthesis of science when it is a synthesis of garbage.
Now, you've discovered that ChatGPT, the artificial intelligence tool that we are told is going to revolutionise how we do our jobs, how we study, how we seek information, well, it seems to be well and truly hijacked by the climate cult. You've looked into this, and when you ask it to list the arguments for fossil fuels, what does it tell you, Alex? Does it tell you about how fossil fuels provide cheap, reliable energy, or how they've helped lift millions out of poverty or improve living standards? Does it explain that?
Well, here's the thing. So ChatGPT is actually, in my view, a sign of hope because it's really gotten better in the last few months in response to feedback. And I think particularly my feedback when it comes to fossil fuels, because when a reader of mine actually made a query about using more make a 10-paragraph argument for using more fossil fuels to increase human happiness, which is a very legitimate thing. And ChatGPT said, I cannot do this. I am ethically prohibited from doing this. I brought attention to this. Elon Musk responded, which, as you can imagine, got a lot of attention. Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, said, hey, this is not what we intend. We're going to try to change it. And to his credit, if you look now at the official OpenAI guidelines, they specifically say as their one example of dealing with controversial ideas, that OpenAI's ChatGPT should make an argument for fossil fuels without qualification. And now if you use the latest version of it, ChatGPT 4, it actually does make an argument for for using more fossil fuels, including to increase human happiness. So actually, ChatGPT is starting to get better, and it really shows what happens when you put articulate pressure on these things.
Well, that is good to hear, because I'm seeing a lot of examples of ChatGPT just being this woke machine, whether it's asked questions about race relations, asked questions about climate change and other issues. It tends to give a very leftist point of view, but you've managed to get some meaningful change there, so that's good to hear. Hopefully that will happen across other areas. Now, I want to ask you about President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. It's projected to fall short of its initial target, leading to the presidential envoy for climate, John Kerry, to reassure Democrats that the president will be doing a lot more. This includes changes on automobiles, light trucks, heavy trucks, a number of other initiatives. Alex, John Kerry, I know, was just a terrible operator when it came to foreign policy in previous governments. How do you judge his performance as Biden's climate czar?
Well, I mean, you might as well ask me, how do you judge his progress or performance as Biden's economy destroyer? I mean, in a sense, he's doing a mediocre job of destroying the economy. Like, climate czar is a ridiculous euphemism, because what it means is fossil fuel opponent. All the so-called climate policy, it's not about being safe from climate. If you were for that, you'd focus on abundant energy, technology, dealing with climate danger. Like, you'd focus on actually being safe from climate. Climate policy is just a euphemism for fossil fuel opposition with no real alternative. So Kerry is, he's not convincing a lot of people around the world to forego fossil fuel use because he's not that persuasive or appealing a guy. But really, it's not a persuasive or appealing idea to anyone who lives in reality, which is that you need cheap, reliable energy, and fossil fuels are your main way of getting it. This is why China is building all kinds of new coal plants. They have more coal plants in development than, in terms of capacity, than we have in the whole United States. So that's just what they have that's new, let alone their existing fleet. So, I mean, the problem with Kerry is he should be fired, but his position should be fired.
Well, you're right about China also. They're building, 2 new coal-fired plants every week. The pace there is astonishing. And then you look at what's happening here, and this is a local example I'm going to tell you about. The impact of closing cheap, reliable forms of energy and the attack on fossil fuels has seen soaring prices, and that's seeing recreation centres across Victoria no longer adequately heating their pools because they can't afford the exorbitant costs. The Herald Sun reports centres are also considering slashing their operating hours amid fears cooler water temperatures will affect patron numbers, the well-being of older Australians and babies learning to swim. Alex, it's just another example of the self-harm rich Western nations are indulging in right now.
And really, this is why I hate the term progressive, because so much of what is called progressive is regressive. So it's really a regressive movement. And that's the essence of what the modern environmental movement is, because they're really saying don't impact nature, don't impact the earth, which means don't be productive, don't be prosperous. So it should really be embarrassing that it's hard to have a swimming pool year round that you can keep warm, that we've regressed to that point. I mean, we should be flying all over the place and flying cars, not being worried about, is it the right temperature to swim? And that's what these regressive energy policies get you, unfortunately.
It is so sad because in Victoria, though Australia, I know, is around the world seen as a hot country, Victoria can get pretty cold, and to not have public swimming pools adequately heated because the energy costs are so high. If you told me that 5 years ago, I would have said there's no chance of that happening. Alex Epstein, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.